Last Saturday morning, a young couple stood on the footpath outside a terrace house in Merrickville. They had been saving for 4 years. No holidays, same beaten-up Corolla, dinner at home almost every night. They had $180,000 sitting in the bank, and they genuinely believed this was their moment. The auctioneer opened at $950,000. 11 minutes later, it was done. They never raised their hand once. Half the homes that went to auction across Sydney last weekend did not sell. Not because buyers failed to show up, not because people do not desperately need somewhere to live, but because the people standing on those footpaths did the maths, and the math said no. So they walked away. Again. Since the 1970s, Westpac and the Melbourne Institute have asked Australians every single month whether it is a good time to buy a home. The long-run average of that index is 120. Right now it sits at 82.9, a number this survey has never once recorded in 50 years of asking. Australia has never wanted to buy less than it does right now. But through most of 2025, prices were still climbing. So if nobody wants to buy, who has been doing the buying? The answer to that question is the whole story. Start with the number everyone quotes. The national median dwelling value sat at just over $922,000 as of February 2026. In the combined capital cities, it had cleared $1 million, confronting enough. But the median price is actually the wrong number to be looking at. The number that tells you the real state of this market is the price-to-income ratio. How many years of full household income it takes to buy a typical home. When that ratio sits at 3, economists consider housing genuinely affordable. When it hits 5, researchers classify it as severely unaffordable. Australia's ratio right now is 8.2. 3 is affordable. 5 is severe. We are at 8.2. A couple in Brisbane, both working full-time, both earning close to the median Australian wage of around $67,000 each, takes home roughly $134,000 combined before tax. To buy a median-priced capital city home, they need 8 full years of their entire combined income. Before rent, before groceries, before the power bill, before the HECS repayment that disappears silently from every payslip without asking. And that is just to get in the door. Once you are in, servicing a new home loan on a typical Australian property now consumes 45% of household income. The threshold where housing costs start actively damaging your financial life is 30%. A couple buying in Blacktown or Sunshine or Salisbury today is in financial stress before they have unpacked a single box. Now here is the part that rarely gets said out loud. Saving a deposit in this environment is not slow. It is mathematically broken. To avoid lender's mortgage insurance, you need a 20% deposit, somewhere between $150,000 and $200,000 before stamp duty or legal costs. But that target is not sitting still while you save. Home values rose close to 10% year on year heading into 2026. For every $100,000 in your savings account, the finish line shifted by roughly $90,000. You are running towards something that keeps moving away from you, and you are doing it while paying rent that is up 5.5% annually. The result is that it now takes the average Australian 11 years to save a house deposit. In 2012, it took 5. That change has nothing to do with smashed AVO or streaming subscriptions. It is the direct result of prices rising faster than incomes while rent ate through whatever was left. 11 years means you start at 22, and if nothing goes wrong, no illness, no job loss, no relationship ending, no car dying on the side of the highway, you might be ready at 33, by which point the target has shifted again. That is not a housing ladder. That is a treadmill, and someone keeps turning up the speed. 3 years ago, 43% of Australian households on median incomes could afford to buy a typical home. Today, that figure is 14%. In Sydney, it is 10%. 9 out of 10 median income households in Sydney cannot afford to buy a median-priced home in the city where they live and work. And yet, through most of 2025, prices kept rising. Someone was buying. When you look at who, everything becomes clear. My name is Tony. This channel exists because most Australian financial media will not say what I am about to say. If that is why you are here, Subscribe now because this conversation is far from over. Think of the Australian property market as a casino. You walk in off the street and sit down at the table with whatever you manage to save. The people already seated have been there for 10 or 20 years. They are playing the same game but under a completely different set of rules. Not because they worked harder, because the house gave them an advantage before you ever walk through the door. The first advantage is called negative gearing. When an investor owns a rental property and in the cost of holding it, mortgage interest, maintenance, council rates, add up to more than the rent coming in, they are running at a loss. In most countries, a loss is just a loss. In Australia, that loss gets deducted against the investor's ordinary taxable salary. Someone earning a good wage and running a property at a $25,000 annual loss cuts their tax bill accordingly. The government subsidizes their holding costs while they wait for the asset to go up. Every Australian taxpayer funds that subsidy whether they own property or not. Here is what nobody tells you about who actually uses this. Negative gearing is not primarily a game for the wealthy. The people most dependent on it earn between $80,000 and $180,000 a year. Teachers, nurses, a project manager in Chatswood with one unit on the Gold Coast. People who looked at their super balance at 45, did the maths, panicked quietly, and did what Australian culture told them was the safe move. They bought property because the tax system made it the most rational decision available to them. And in doing so, they made housing less affordable for everyone trying to buy their first home. That is the trap inside the trap. The villain here is not a landlord with 40 properties. The villain is a system so poorly designed that it pushed ordinary middle-income Australians into property investment as their only viable retirement strategy, and made housing unaffordable as a direct consequence. Asking a nurse in Penrith to give up negative gearing means asking her to give up her retirement plan. That is why no government touches it. That is why the casino keeps running. The second advantage for seated players is the capital gains tax discount. Sell an asset held for more than a year, including property, and you pay tax on only half the profit. The other half is yours, tax-free. In a normal casino, everyone pays the same rake. Here, the long-term players pay less when they win. Together, these two concessions cost the federal budget around $15 billion this financial year. The capital gains discount alone cost over $19 billion in 2024 to 2025. Both combined are forecast to cost $181 billion over the next decade. In the same year, emergency housing services across the country reported demand beyond their capacity. In the same year, rental vacancy rates sat at or below 1% in most capital cities. The Australian government spent more on tax concessions for property investors than it spent on social housing, homelessness services, and rent assistance combined. More money subsidizing landlords than housing people sleeping in cars. Same year, same budget. Now some of you are thinking, I have one investment property. Are you calling me the problem? No. People with investment properties are making rational decisions inside a system that was deliberately built to reward them. The rules of the casino are the problem, not the people playing by them. But those rules, running at scale across 30 years of transactions, have created something that should concern every Australian regardless of age or whether they own or rent. The Grattan Institute found that a 25-year-old today is half as likely to own a home by 30 as their parents were at the same age. Half. That is not a housing market under pressure. That is a generation being systematically shut out. If your parents own property, there is a path in, a deposit contribution, a loan guarantee, an inheritance. The bridge exists. If your parents do not own property, every mechanism in this market works against you. The tax concessions flow to owners. The capital growth flows to owners. The casino loyalty card goes to people who are already at the table. And every year this continues. The gap between those two groups compounds. Home ownership is quietly becoming something you inherit rather than something you achieve, not through hard work or discipline, through the accident of which family you were born into. That is a different kind of country to the one most Australians believe they live in. In the past decade, Australia's population grew by 8 million people. Over the same period, the number of properties listed for sale fell 33%, from 339,000 down to 228,000. Rentals available dropped 47%. Construction costs are up 30 to 40% since the pandemic. Approvals are near decade lows. In every state, planning systems have proven far more responsive to existing homeowners opposing new development than to the people who need somewhere to live. The bottom rung was not raised, it was removed. When housing becomes unaffordable for workers, workers leave. In 2023 to 2024, more than 104,000 people left Sydney. Only 63,000 arrived to replace them, a net loss of 41,000 people in a single year. Sydney is now the only major Australian capital that would be shrinking without overseas migration. The people who were supposed to become the next wave of buyers are gone. And when buyers leave, developers pull back, supply stalls, prices spike again from a higher base, more people leave, and the whole cycle repeats. Every iteration worse than the one before. The couple who stood on that footpath in Merrickville with $180,000 saved and never raised their hand, they did not fail. They walked into a casino where the rules were written before they were born, and the house has been winning ever since. So what do you actually do? 4 steps, specific to the Australian system. No vague advice. The first step takes under 10 minutes and you can do it tonight. Go to the ASIC Money Smart Mortgage Repayment Calculator. Put in the suburb you are actually considering, the deposit you actually have, and your real take-home pay after HECS repayments have already been removed. What percentage of that take-home is the monthly repayment? If it is above 30%, you are in stress territory before you sign anything. Run that number before any other conversation about buying, because the most expensive mistake you can make is using someone else's math to make your own decision. The second step is one most people skip entirely. Before you assume that building a deposit should be your main financial priority right now, log into MyGov, go to the ATO section, and look at your current super balance. Then use the Money Smart Superannuation Calculator to compare 2 scenarios side by side. $200 a fortnight going into voluntary before tax super contributions versus $200 a fortnight going into a high-interest savings account. For people earning above $120,000, the tax saving inside super often outperforms the deposit strategy by a margin that is genuinely surprising. For others, it does not. You need your number, not a general rule from someone whose situation is nothing like yours. The third step is understanding what the first home guarantee actually does before you rely on it. It lets eligible buyers purchase with a 5% deposit without paying lender's mortgage insurance, saving typically between $10,000 and $30,000 upfront. It does not make the home cheaper. It gets you in the door faster with a bigger mortgage. Check your eligibility at Housing Australia, confirm the price cap for your state, then run the 30-year repayment comparison between a 5% deposit loan and a 20% deposit loan. The difference in total interest paid over the life of that loan can exceed $100,000. Know what you are agreeing to before you agree to it. The fourth step requires honesty. If you cannot see a realistic path to buying in your current city within 3 years at your current pace, that is information, not failure. Information. Perth's median price sits around $290,000 below Sydney right now. Adelaide is producing stronger rental yields than Melbourne. Brisbane's price-to-income ratio, while worsening, remains below the southern capitals. Spend one serious hour running what a different geography does to your 10-year financial position before you dismiss it. A decade building equity in a market that wants you as a buyer is worth more than a decade renting in one that has priced you out. This is not a crash story. Crashes are loud. They produce emergency headlines in a moment when everyone agrees something broke. What is happening here is slower and quieter than a crash. Slow enough that for many people who have already won, it barely registers. The rules did not break all at once. They shifted gradually across 30 years of decisions that were each individually defensible and collectively devastating. And a great many Australians, including many who have done very well out of those shifts, have not fully absorbed what has been built. Genuine reform would mean rebalancing negative gearing and the capital gains discount so the largest concessions stop flowing predominantly to multi-property investors at the cost of first buyers. It would mean sustained investment in supply, rezoning for density against the organized resistance of existing owners, and replacing stamp duty with a broad annual land tax, something the OECD recommended explicitly in 2026. Tokyo has kept housing stable for 20 years through consistent density policy. Vienna runs one of the most affordable rental markets in the developed world through decades of public investment. Singapore rebuilt its entire housing system in a single generation. None of that was luck. It was governments choosing their populations over their property owners, repeatedly, over a long time. Australia has made different choices across many governments for 30 years. The most reliable voters in this country are over 50. The people most harmed by this system are under 40. That gap is not a coincidence. It is the operating logic of Australian housing policy. And whether anything actually changes depends on whether Australians who have already won decide that what this system is doing to the people coming behind them is worth using their vote to fix. That couple from Marrickville went home on Saturday night to a rental property. They sat down, opened their savings account, looked at $180,000, and started trying to work out what another decade of this looks like. The casino is still running, the house is still winning, and the rules have not changed. If this video gave you a clearer picture of what you are actually up against, not bad luck, not a lack of discipline, but a set of rules written by people who had already won, then subscribe. Because next week we go into exactly what you can do inside a system that was not built for you. The only honest question left is this: now that you understand what this market was actually designed to do, what are you going to do differently tomorrow morning?